personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. This is the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know now. I am super excited to have a special guest on the show, Andrea Amico. He's from Georgia, partially, right? And he's the founder of Privacy for Cars. Nice to have you here.
Thank you, Debbie. I'm super excited to be here.
I'm fascinated about cars. My dad was a mechanical engineer, so I know like way more than the average person should ever know about cars. And then over the years, as cars became more, have more computer systems in it, right? It was kind of shutting out people who sort of did the mechanical things about cars. So we could talk about that as well, because I want your thoughts on kind of the right to repair stuff that sort of dovetails into privacy. But before we get into that, talk to me about sort of your journey in privacy and why you created Privacy for Cars.
Yeah, I have been with the automotive industry for more than a decade now. And one of the companies I used to run was a very large used car inspection company. And one day I was going through vehicles doing an audit, and it just dawned on me. I say, oh my gosh, people are leaving their home address and their garage door codes in their car. How often does this happen? And what else is there? And, who is going to do something about it? And I started asking questions. And interestingly, all the industry veterans I talked to, they really didn't know. Nobody knew. There were a lot of myths, but there were not a lot of facts. And so I started collecting data and building statistics and showing it to people and say, hey, guys, this is a real thing. And actually, numbers have gotten worse. I think if you've been to our website, you will see very loud and clear as soon as you get in there. More than 4 out of 5 cars Bastille were resold with people's data in it. And it's not only the home address and garage door codes, which God forbid, the next person uses. But it's your phone records. Increasingly, it's biometrics, payment systems, identifiers. There's a lot. And, if you want to have an interesting couple of hours, just pull the privacy policy of your manufacturer of the car that makes your car and gasp at it, because it's just really stunning if you never have thought about how much data is in cars nowadays.
I was stunned. I knew that cars, as a result of technology, the car makers were very forward thinking about how they were using computer systems in cars. And so I did a video, I think last year, on automobile telematics, because I think people think, okay, my car has this cool infotainment system. I can press buttons and have it do really cool things. But what I didn't know, and what I found out about 10 years ago, was how much additional data that a car collects that you would not even know about as a consumer. So I'll tell you a story. So I went to get my car service at a dealership that wasn't the one that I typically would go to, right? It was one in a different town. And I drove up and I said, I want an oil change. And I asked the lady, like, do you need my name and, information, and like check me in or something? And she said, no. So she got her iPad and she got this dongle and she put it under the dashboard and popped up my name, my address, my phone number. I literally could have fainted when I saw the stuff. I couldn't believe it. So I think that I had always thought that those telematic systems were tracking just things about the operation of the vehicle, right? To sort of help people fix the vehicle. I did not know at that point that it was collecting a lot more personally identifiable information. And you as a consumer don't have any visibility into what is actually collected about you in these cars. Like some of the stuff that you talked about, one thing that people be shocked about is, let's say, your car knows your weight every day when you get in your car because it
Yeah.
weighs you to know if you have a car that has like an airbag. It needs to know how much pressure to apply to the airbag based on the weight of the individual, right? So that information can get sold to other companies, right? So it's this whole back channel of data collection that isn't apparent to individuals. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, so as you pointed out, the journey over the years, right? The journey went from cars are mechanical things that take you from point A to point B. Then typically data collection started with good intent in mind and typically was driven by safety, right? Your example of the weight is a great example, right? You need to know how much firepower you need to put in the airbag to stop people of different masses, right? So you need to take their weight every time they sit on the seat. You're actually jumping on a scale, which again people really don't realize. And again, it started with great intentions of making cars safer. And similarly, how your vehicle was performing was, originally meant for making sure that your maintenance is working and then to improve the design of cars. And then automakers started to realize that they had a treasure trove of data. And that's where the pivot started to happen. And that's where I think consumers need to start to be worried because they decided, well, how can we use this data first internally, and then who can we sell it to? And right now we track over 500 companies that collect data from your car or buy it and sell it and trade it. And I'm sure we're just scratching the surface. And as you pointed out, some of this data may affect how much you pay in insurance. Some of this data may affect how much your car is valued when you go and sell it. This data may affect choices that you do in your everyday life without realizing you've been nudged in taking one route instead of another because route A is going to take you in front of a gas station that has an agreement with the automaker, and so they'll drive you in front of that one instead of the one that is not part of the commercial, right? So we started to really enter a world in which people's actions in the physical world are being influenced by the technology in vehicles. Not to mention, and again, this data then is potentially available for riches, is sold to companies, and by and large, consumers have no idea.
My boyfriend driving my car does that where it has the GPS right with the car, and it takes me on all these crazy wacky routes, and he doesn't like using it at all. So he uses like Google Maps or something on his phone, and it'll tell a totally different route. So that makes a lot of sense to me. That because I couldn't understand like why would it take me, to this different route?
Well, some of it is algorithm. I'm not sure that Google doesn't do it either,
I'm
right?
sure, yeah,
Because
probably.
so we've done the test with a bunch of friends of starting at the same place and going to the same place, and two people use Waze, two people use Google Maps, and each of the four of us could ride in a different route. And then you got to ask yourself why. And the problem is that you cannot really answer because all those algorithms are not transparent. It's not clear if it's random, if you're really being pushed in one direction versus the other. But I think that what is concerning is that a car has become a browser in the physical world, and your clickstream, your browsing history is for sale to a lot of companies, and I think a consumer should be concerned about it.
Yeah. Let's talk about contact lists, right? And text. Okay. So when
Mhm.
like I like to ride in my car, I'll connect my phone to the car to listen to music, for example. But in addition to that, regardless of what else I want to do, it is downloading my contact list to the car. And my car has a capability to download text regardless of whether I want it to or not, right? So that's something that happens that I know a lot of people don't understand.
Oh yeah, so I think we all had the experience of syncing our phone to use the hands-free system, which, by the way, is a legal requirement in most states. I think a lot of us have run low on battery and we plugged into the USB port, and what happens then, right? And again, there's a lot of myths, and you may get a pop-up that tell you, do you want to download your contacts? And If you hit no, then maybe because it's a rental car, you think that nothing has happened. That's not true. Every time you sync your phone with the car, your car essentially downloads a lot of stuff from your phone and creates a mini clone of your phone. Again, this was designed originally for safety purposes. So the data being locally stored is faster to put in front of drivers in case of emergencies, to be more responsive. But again, now this data is there, and companies in their privacy policy say that they have the right to use it. Not only that, if you sell your car or you just finished renting a car, the next person can help themselves. And 3 or 4 years ago, we actually showed to over 20 manufacturers how easy it was to extract the text messages and contacts from cars. And I taught my daughter back then was 8 years old, and I taught her how to extract the text messages of mom, which I think is great parenting, but we can disagree. But it's that easy. And actually, last year we were collaborating with another researcher in Europe, and he did that in a different way, and we collaborated, and we believe that that technique works with 100% of the cars on the road, not just half of the cars on the road. And so, if you sync your phone, just be aware your text messages, what music you listen to, but also depending on the car, stuff from transactions, what apps you've been using, files you may have saved on your phone, photos you may have taken on your phone, what social media you're on, what handle you use. A lot of this stuff, there's a track of it in your car, and it's literally up for grabs from whichever person it comes next. In fact, there's police has been used to use this data. There's actually right now a proposal in the US Senate to pass a law to create protections and Fourth Amendment protections around these exact issues, because senators are starting to realize, hold on a second, you cannot get through my phone without a warrant, but you don't need it if you get into my car, and they don't think it's right.
Right. Yeah. So wow, this is unbelievable. So a lot of this comes down to the third party doctrine about how legal jurisprudence has thought about kind of the physicality of where you are with your information, and then also third parties that have your data. So if a third party has data about you, it has lesser protections than you would have. It was a physical thing in your space. So this is definitely an argument that we're seeing in the U.S. for sure, and definitely internationally about. So first of all, who owns this data, right? So you would think the data about you that you own it, but in the U.S. you don't really own that data, or you don't have the same level of agency with it if it's in a third party's hands, and that third party may be your automobile.
Yeah, and interestingly, specifically for vehicles, there was a law passed in 2016. It's called the Driver Privacy Act, and it clearly says if you're the owner of the vehicle, you need to provide your permission, unless there's a warrant in a few other cases like national security, etc. Right? You need the permission of the owner to access data from the car. But this applies to only one of the about 100 computers that are in a car, what is called the black box, the electronic data recorder, right? And so what is stored in there, which is really accident-related data, at what speed you were going, which gear you were in, how hard did you have an impact with another vehicle, that kind of stuff, right, is protected. Everything else, which is 99.9% of the data collected by cars, is not. Which is why now you start to have advocates on civil liberties, advocates on privacies. Again, there's people in Congress that are really looking at this stuff. They're saying, hold on a second, the car is becoming a backdoor to extract data from phones of people. Is that right?
Wow. Oh my goodness. I just have so many things running in my head, but I just have so many things I want to ask you about. Let's talk about apps with cars. So I tell people this all the time. And so for people, I know some people who don't want to interact with their car with the app. I get it. But if you have a car that has an app that can help you connect with data about your car, you should at least claim the app, because other people can claim the app if you don't, right? So all they really need is proximity to the vehicle and the VIN number, basically. And they could claim your app and they could actually, if your car has capability, it can do remote functions. So it can, turn on the alarm, it can unlock or lock doors, it can track sort of where the vehicle is. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so as you pointed out, a growing amount of vehicles now come with a companion app, right? And the manufacturer have put a number of features into these apps. Typically, you would know the mileage, do you need service? But increasingly, it's where's the car? Can I unlock it? Can I start it? So, you wouldn't want somebody else to have credentials, right? So 3 years ago, we actually reached out to the Automotive ISAC, which is the association created by the manufacturer to disclose, security issues. And because we had done a test and we realized how easy it was to take over credentials. And by the way, some of these credentials are for sale on the dark web, right? And you can buy them for a few hundreds of dollars. And most manufacturers did not respond back then. A couple of them actually got back to us and said, well, if you were to do that, that would be a breach of our terms of service, which I'm sure has criminals all over the world shaking in their boots. And that was the answer. And, and unfortunately, we keep hearing cases. There's a criminal case actually in California courts right now. It's a horrible case of domestic abuse where, the ex-spouse had access to the app of the person and use it to physically put her in danger. But there's also, growing amount of cases in which consumers come to us and say, hey, I sold my car 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago. I can still see where it is and I can still unlock it and start it. And, so that's one of the things that we work on and to help consumers have protections. And it's a very evolving issue where I don't think the companies have quite grasped the magnitude and the implications, because now it's no more just a privacy issue. This is a safety issue.
Right. And I think people don't understand, if you have a car that you let someone borrow or you sell it, that data doesn't automatically stop. There's another action that you or someone else as a consumer have to do to transfer that data to a new owner or a new person. So let's say...
And the reality is that it's not visible to consumers that other people may have access, which is dangerous in the first place. Cutting the cord with all these technologies is extremely cumbersome and difficult for consumers. I'm sure that all of your audience had the experience with trying to change provider for their mobile phones or their cable company. So take that experience that you had, multiplied by 5, and realize that 3 of the 5 is companies you don't even know who they are because it's not disclosed in the privacy policy. That's the effort that is required, and we don't think it's right.
I agree with that. Well, let's talk about privacy. So this is fascinating. So there are some right to repair laws, and I'm going to talk about the Massachusetts law. This is fascinating, and the reason why it has a privacy angle is because of the data, the personally identifiable data that gets collected as in addition to kind of like the operation, computer telematics that are in an automobile. So in the state of Massachusetts, I think as of this year, new cars that are being sold in the state of Massachusetts have to have kind of an open system where a individual can see to some extent what data is being collected about them in cars, and then also be able to open this up so that other people beyond kind of car dealerships can repair cars. So this is the issues. When cars became more as computer systems, manufacturers and dealerships were working together to try to keep almost like a closed loop, right? on who could repair these cars. So if you had a mom and pop shop down the street that you liked and trusted and you wanted them to repair your car, if your car has certain types of telematics or computer systems, there were things that maybe that mom and pop shop didn't have access to because these manufacturers and dealerships were holding on to this information. So Massachusetts passed this law, which is a right to repair law, which basically says, car manufacturers and dealerships can't, have to have an open system so that these mom and pop shops, they have access to the data so that they can also repair these cars. But in addition to the repair and kind of the mechanics of what happens within the automobile with these, infotainment systems and things like that, people aren't aware still that there's all this additional personally identifiable information that is in cars. And I think a lot of automakers have been against these laws, didn't want to really be transparent. Obviously, part of it is sharing or maybe losing kind of their share of the auto repair or aftermarket type of money stream, but then also not being transparent with individuals about what data is in their cars. Because I think if people knew what their car collected, they would be horrified.
I think if people knew what their car collected, they would be horrified. First of all, I'm sure you know that the right to repair is right now stuck in the courts, right? There was a referendum. The population of Massachusetts wants the right to repair act passed, but it is stuck in the courts. There's a legal battle between the manufacturers and the city attorney of Massachusetts. So we'll see what happens with that. Our perspective is that to oversimplify things, there's really two types of data that cars collect. It's technical data and personal data. And that's how we define it, right? So is there a problem if your repair person knows if the timing of the firing in the cylinder is correct or not, if the oil pressure is correct or not, if the temperature of certain goods is correct or not? We don't think a consumer really would worry about that, right? The second in which you start to associate that information with GPS information, with identifiers, that's where it becomes, actually something I think consumers should be concerned about. I don't think that they would want their repair shop necessarily to know where they've been or who they talk to, but probably they wouldn't want their manufacturer to know that either, right? And manufacturers today do. I agree with you that if consumers saw what data was collected, there would be a much bigger debate. And it wouldn't be about, can I have my car repaired with the shop of my choice? It would be, why in the world is all this data collected in the first place? And what are you doing with it? And nobody really wants to have that conversation, I guess, other than us. So that makes us a little bit of an outlier in the industry.
So where are we going with this? Are you seeing automakers trying to be more open? Are they being more closed? I mean, obviously they're going through the courts to try to stop a lot of this kind of transparency. I feel like the future it has to be transparent when you're handling data of individuals. And I feel like the automotive industry needs to wake up to the fact that this is like what the future is going to be. So they need to try to find a way either not to collect this data, right? Or find better ways to protect it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think that more and more manufacturers are realizing that the ground is shifting and that more people are aware that personal information is collected by vehicles. We see a lot of evolution in the privacy policies, but also in the practices of manufacturers. There's a growing number of OEMs that, for instance, when your vehicle is resold, at least in certain channels, they make sure that your data is not sold together with the car, right? And so they ask this data to be wiped. We actually work with a number of them. I think that when it comes to third parties, it's far less transparent. And in fact, if you were to read the privacy policies, first of all, I hope that you have a hard time sleeping, and then we'll fix it. But if you were to read those privacy policies, very few mention any third parties by name, and it will be household names like SiriusXM. But there's very little clarity over what data is collected, to which company it actually goes, what was the specific purpose of the collection of those pieces of information. And in fact, even we collaborate with, we offer a free service to consumers, right, to assert their rights, and we help them place requests with not just with manufacturers, literally with hundreds of companies to know what data they have about. And the answers tend to be very vague. And typically they just regurgitate whatever is on the privacy policy, but they really don't explain to consumer exactly what was collected and for what purpose. And we think that needs to change.
Yeah. Are you seeing any movement about this in Europe? Because obviously Europe has stronger privacy regulations related to personal data.
Yeah. So interestingly, in Europe, there's two pieces of regulation that currently apply: GDPR and e-privacy. And the reason why e-privacy applies is because a vehicle is what is called, is a piece of terminal equipment. So that's what this regulation is about, right? And there are already mandates in place that have been in place since the original GDPR, and there's also been, white papers written by the European Data Protection Board on how they exactly applies to connected vehicles. So there's a lot of clarity of the fact that yes, cars collect personal information. Yes, it is regulated. Yes, it's not allowable to sell a car or rent a car with leaving the personal information, the previous person in there. The reality is unfortunately quite different. So we just did an audit in the UK, and our figure of 4 out of 5 is right on the dot. Also in Europe, UK now is Brexited, but they have the same general regulations as you can imagine. And so one thing is what the law says, and what is actually happening is unfortunately still quite different. It's still a huge gap that companies need to fill.
Yeah, I mean, so this all plugs into data brokers, which is an industry that has been thriving over the years, mostly because they operate kind of in the shadows. Like people don't know who they are or what they are and what they're doing with this data. And then part of it, some people can't imagine what happens when this data is kind of correlated together or gathered. Maybe let's say you use 5 different services for something. The data that you generate from those 5 services may be shared by those 5 companies, and maybe that gives them a more fulsome view about you. And the issue is if they are using that data to make decisions about a consumer that could be harmful. It's not transparent.
Oh, absolutely. So we have done a few tests in which we asked ourselves, okay, if I were to go to a random dealership and I were to test drive a car, and I could take a 30-second video of select screens in the car, what can I know about the previous owners? And you will be appalled. Right? Because first of all, you can extract a lot of personal information straight out of the car that doesn't require really any effort, right? Where people live, where they've been, that means very quickly you will know, is this, okay, so we know the first name, we know the last name, we know where they live, we know how much the house is worth, we know where they take the kids to school, we know which hospitals they go to, we know where they go out for, what's their favorite place for run. I mean, you get to know all this stuff, right? Of course, because again, the car is a browser, and the browsing history is right there unless you wipe it. So it's super easy, right? But then once you start to combine it with other sources, as you said, you get to get a much finer picture. And then if you really had access to the entire stream of data that you can extract from the telematics, that's when you actually start to know the behavior of people. It's not just how they drive. There's an increasing amount of vehicles now have driver monitoring systems. And there's a lot of debate about, around Tesla, for instance, and how to make the car safer. And How could people be in the back seat, and we should slap a big camera right in there to make sure that people are behind the driver's seat? Well, the problem with that is that a lot of companies are actually doing this. But what they're doing is not just, am I paying attention to the road? In fact, the largest supplier of these in-car cameras just acquired 2 companies. These are AI companies that specialize in detecting people's emotions. So consumers should be aware that when you drive a car, there's no red blinking light, but if you're driving a recent vehicle, chances are there's an infrared camera behind the dashboard that is looking at you every second, and it's trying to interpret what you're doing. Again, the basic stuff is, are you paying attention to the road, or you're looking at your lap because that's where your phone is? And so, maybe buzzes you and say, hey, pay attention to the road. That's a good thing. But from there to say, you look hungry, I know that usually you stop at Chick-fil-A. I'm saying that because I'm in Georgia, right? So, oh, Andrea, there's a Chick-fil-A 2 miles down the road, right? Or you look tired, there's a Starbucks 3 miles down the road. It's a 1 minute detour. Do you want to do that, right? So again, your actions are being nudged for what was originally a purpose of safety into something really different.
Yeah. Let's talk about, you touched on nudge technology. I did a video on that as well. So nudging, the theory behind nudging sort of started in education, right? So it wasn't really a technological thing, but what we're seeing is that this nudging, which is basically in education, it was kind of used to give positive reinforcement to people who were learning different things. But what we're seeing, because it's kind of a psychological sort of manipulation. So nudging in itself isn't bad, but nudge is bad when it's being used in ways that aren't transparent to people. And then also, instead of, let me nudge you to learn or kind of increase your skill level, to let me nudge you so you can buy my products or a product of someone that I have a business relationship with. Can you talk a little bit about nudge?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm sure there's a huge debate now around dark patterns, right? And reality is that trying to change behavior of people per se is not good or evil. As you pointed out, if I taught you to be sticking to cars, if I taught you to be a better driver, to keep a safety distance, to be more aware of your surrounding, and by doing so, am I reducing your likelihood of getting into an accident? Is this a good or bad thing? I think it's a very different thing to say, again, you look tired, but I'm not going to send you to Dunkin' Donuts, but I will send you to Starbucks because we're going to get, 5 cents out of that transaction. And I think, so again, the intent and the transparency, as you pointed out, those are the 2 things that really make a difference in the ethics of it.
Yeah.
And regulating this is, I'm sure, is very difficult, right? And we're still at the very beginnings of how technology companies do this in the physical world. Yeah. There's plenty of nudging in dark pattern in the online world. I think it's quite different. Am I pushing you to click an ad, and I'm changing your behavior by 0.2%, but in aggregate with all my users, it makes a difference? That's one thing. But am I convincing you to take a right turn versus a left turn in the physical world? I think that's quite different.
Yeah. Wow, that's crazy. So I work a lot with kind of smart cities and stuff about fleets and telematics and, collecting data and, the way the cities use cars and Internet of Things. So, I tell people, your car is basically a computer. It's a series of computers on wheels. And one thing that people don't understand about cars is that the data that's captured there can be transmitted wirelessly to other places. So it's not just, I think some people think, okay, this stuff is collected, is in my car. It's like, no, it's actually, being transmitted wirelessly to other things, right? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, back to your example, right? When you said that you pulled your car into the shop and they knew who you were. Depending on what car you drive, they know when you just turn into the dealership, right? They get a signal with, hey, Debbie's pulling in. Make sure you get her in bay number 2 and call her by name and offer her a coffee because it's her favorite drink. That's not cyber. This is actually happening today,
I'm
right?
horrified by this. Oh my
Uh,
goodness.
and that's the reality of cars. And reality is that the all this technology has been originally evolved as features, right? And so this is as crazy as saying, we sell typewriters. Oh, but then as a feature, we started to put a hard drive so we can record what you typed so you can remember it. Or as a feature, we decided to put a screen so you actually don't need the paper. Or as a feature, we added a modem. Or as a feature, we added whatever, right? And everything is a laptop. But when it talks to, when it comes to what measures should we take to protect that, the industry still likes to say it's still a typewriter. We don't have to do much. And that's problematic. And this is not just a manufacturer situation, right? Saying that to fix all of this, we just need to get the manufacturer to do something and change something. It's not true anymore. This is like saying, let's go and tell Intel and Dell that they're responsible for, privacy and security on the internet. Cat's out of the bag at this point, because literally the cars are hyper connected. There's hundreds of companies that are involved in exchanging data. And let's not forget that, those assets are rented, sold by dealerships, they're financed, they're insured. And don't these companies have actually a responsibility to protect the data of consumers? We think they do, right? So this is a much bigger discussion than, what should Ford do, or what should name your favorite manufacturer. It has become a much more complex problem to solve.
Yeah. Also, the technology, I don't think people understand how advanced technology is now, right? They don't understand the things they're using now. They don't understand what it's doing with their data and how it's collecting information. And then now we're getting into a situation where, the technology will be light years ahead of where people are thinking. That's exactly where we're going with the metaverse and connected devices, instead of, Internet of Things, devices collecting information just on a device. Now they will talk to one another about you and get more information and make more inferences. And those inferences concern me quite a lot, right? So
Yeah.
these, in addition to the tangible data that these devices can collect, also they can make inferences, as you said. What are your thoughts?
Well, all of this is true. I think what I'd like to point out is how cars are different. And in my mind, they're different in two ways. One is that you and I can argue how important it may be to name your favorite social media platform, okay? But there is very little debate on the fact that if Americans do not have access to personal transportation, there are some real world impact in most of the United States in their access to healthcare, being able to have a job, and just in general, secure their well-being and their financial well-being. And so cars are not optional for most people. And I think that this raises the bar on the level of protections that are necessary. The other thing is that cars are sold through dealerships, they're rented to rental car companies, they're insured by other companies. And so unfortunately, not only it's very difficult to understand what data is collected by cars, but you have a little bit of this, this drill in which the manufacturer tells the dealership what they're supposed to say. The dealership is supposed to tell you certain things, and then you're supposed to read the and so every time that there's all this disintermediation of information, it becomes even more confusing than it should be. In fact, last year we sent consumers to 72 different dealerships, and we asked them to test drive cars. First of all, they found personal information at 88% of the dealerships, right? Just by test driving one or two random cars of their choice, which already tells you the magnitude of the problem. But then we asked consumers, ask a number of questions to the person at the dealerships on how the car works. And it turns out that only 4 out of 72 dealerships, so that's what, 6%, correctly told consumers, yes, this car collects personal information. Yes, the manufacturer has the right to sell this personal information, sell and share, right? And so if you're buying it at a store and the store doesn't know, and I don't think this was malicious. I think that honestly, just like consumers, they don't know, right? But this is why the model of consent is even more broken for cars than for name your average device or service online, because
Right.
it's even more problematic. And let's not forget, cars are the first or second largest purchase of Americans. So this
Right.
is not a small thing. This is for most people, it's the most expensive thing you own.
Right. Also, I just want to touch on this. I had this experience recently. So you talked about the Driver Privacy Act that protects kind of the black box information. It is almost impossible for a regular person to get that data. I found out. It's hard to find out where it is, how to get it, how to talk to people to get it. There are some law firms that specialize and maybe they have deals with people. But I mean, if I have that right, I should be able to see that data, right?
Yeah, reality is that that data will be highly, highly uninteresting. I promise you. So
Yeah.
if you're being asked to pay between $1,000 and $3,000, real numbers that we hear from consumers that tell us, that what they've been asked to access the DDR, just don't spend the money. It's not worth it unless the only moment in which you want to have a copy of the data is if you are in a serious accident and the data is actually being subpoenaed using legal proceedings, right? But otherwise, most people don't know what the yaw angle is in the first place. So why would you want to know what was the yaw angle at a certain time, right? So it really doesn't matter. The data that really matters is, again, from a privacy perspective, is outside of DDR. And it's completely unregulated by the Driver Privacy Act. It's um, how much do you wait? Were you alone in the car? Who else was there? What were you listening to? What were the last 5 things you touched on your infotainment system? How hard do you brake? Where have you been? What were you calling while you were getting there? Were you distracted? I mean, those are the kind of things that are really collected and monetized. And those are the kind of things that are not in DDR, they're not regulated, other than by the privacy policy in the terms of service. And as you can imagine, those are one-sided. A consumer cannot go to a dealership and say, yeah, I'd like to buy the red one on the lot, but I disagree with clause 27 and clause 43, and you redline them and hope to walk out of the lot. You can't do that, right? So there's really no choice.
Right. A lack of choice, a lack of transparency, and a lack of agency. So where do we go from here? What should we be doing that we're not doing now?
Well, so there is some progress, right? So we've been pushing a lot of folks in the industry to really think hard, not just about regulation, but what's good, right? What's good for consumers and consider what's good for business. Is it really good to sell people data together with cars? So do we just sell cars? And so we've actually convinced a lot of companies that before selling the car, the data consumer probably should be taken out. We are creating free tools for consumers, such as this, assert your data right. Anybody can go on our website. They say, I'm a consumer. This is the car I drive. I want X. X being, I want to make sure my telematics doesn't track me. I want to, I bought the new car. How do I know that the old owner is not tracking me, et cetera, right? So we'll take on those cases legally pro bono because we think it's the right thing to do. But I think that consumers should demand for this. If you go to a dealership, shouldn't you ask, if you're trading in your car, you're bringing back your lease, should you say, show me that you're going to get rid of my data? And don't take people's word for it, because we've done that. When we send those consumers to those dealerships, a full third of the dealerships said that they had a process in place to remove the data. And it turns out it wasn't true for at least 3/4 of the dealerships. And
Right.
and so, don't take people's, sure, we do that at face value. Ask them to show you, what are they doing? I mean, we ask the same things when we bring our electronic devices, right? So if you bring back your phone to say your Verizon store, they'll delete the data in front of you, or they'll show you how to do it. At the end of the day, I think people need to demand respect for the data. They need to demand proof, and they need to show companies that they care. Because if consumers don't ask for it, companies themselves will care. I think it's very important, and I'm glad that your audience is really very attuned into this. They will keep asking, let's do the right thing.
And then on the business side, for companies that are developing technologies in this space, you should really be thinking about how to kind of build in privacy at a foundational level, right? So not collecting more than you need, having purpose for what you collect, making it easy for whomever, whether it be the dealership or individual, to be able to either see or even delete the information that's being collected about them. I think it's really important, and I think this issue is only going to become more pressing in the future. Like you said, we've seen some cases, related to domestic violence, where someone may have been stalking someone or tracking cars, and we're seeing this with like air tags, not to pick on Apple, but anything that's doing sort of tracking of people can, even though it may have an advantage, we have to also think about what could be the potential harm. Not that, sometimes manufacturers, they really get excited about the innovation, which is nothing wrong with that, right? But you have to think about the bad side. How can this be used to harm someone, and how can we design it to sort of limit that harm?
Very much agree with everything you said. I think there's a long journey ahead, and we think we're doing we're a small company where I think we're being pretty good at influencing some large players to look at things differently, and we realize it's just a journey. And my hope is that people in your audience will start to think more about what data is in their car, and they'll look at their driveway as they look at the computer they have connected. It's literally the same thing, and the same safeguards they demand to have in place for their other electronic devices. Hopefully, they start to demand they have the same safeguards for their cars.
Excellent, excellent. So if it were the world according to Andrea, and we did everything you said, what would be your wish for privacy in the future?
I think that if people started to ask themselves more, what is my car doing? And then ask accountability from anybody that services that vehicle, their dealerships, their auto finance company, of course, the manufacturer, their rental companies, we will be in a much better place. It always starts with caring and asking that companies do care. I think with those two simple things, we can actually change a lot of behavior in the world and make it a better place.
Yeah, that's a great question. I want to add a comment, something that I'm seeing in the cell phone world that I think is also probably happening in the car world. So there's a trend now that manufacturers are seeing that people who can afford new phones want older phones. Like they're not liking some of the data collection happening. So we're also seeing there's an uptick in people buying used cars or older cars, not the newer cars. So that, to me, that should be a wake up call for the industry to let them know that people aren't really happy with all this, data collection, especially when it isn't transparent to them.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's becoming less and less of a choice, right? So one more thing, which cars are different than your average consumer electronics, right? So if you go to your big box store and you buy a brand new TV today, it is virtually impossible for that TV to not be a smart TV, right? But at least if you take that TV home and you decide to never punch in your Wi-Fi network name and password, then the TV is still dumb as a bag of hammers, right? It doesn't connect anywhere. That's not true with cars. Cars are connected at the factory, and in many cases, a complete disconnection actually not possible because certain safety systems rely on it. And actually, if you were trying to do that, you would spend a lot of money, you would void the warranty, and you would drive an unsafe vehicle, right? So that's the other thing where cars are different. And yes, while I do hear people, sometimes with, oh man, I'm going to buy myself a 1960s Corvette. It sounds pretty cool, I got to tell you, but it's just not a feasible choice for most consumers. And unfortunately, cars do age, right? And if you want to have a reliable vehicle, to say I want to drive a 20-year-old vehicle because it didn't have any of this, it has some real world consequences.
That's fascinating. Oh, wow. Well, I'm so glad to have you on the show. This is amazing. Can't wait for people to hear this. I think everyone needs to hear it in the personal world and the business world. How do people get in contact with you if they're interested in privacy for cars?
Oh, sure. The easiest way for them is to go on our website, which is privacyforcars.com. We also offer a free mobile application for consumers where they can learn by themselves how to delete the data, or at least certain data that is stored in the vehicles. And we also make it easier for them to get in touch with dealerships that may offer protections, and so that they know who are the good folks out there that are actually doing something about it. So you can just look for Privacy for Cars, which is privacy number 4 cars, on the App Store or Google Play, and download it for free. And hopefully people will like it.
Perfect. This is amazing. Thank you again for being on the show. This is amazing, and keep up the great work. I'll be, keeping my eye on you and what you're doing, and hopefully we'll have a chance to collaborate in the future.
Oh, you just threatened to be on your watch list. So now I know I really gotta be here. Well, Debbie,
That's right.
It's been really lovely to be here again. Thank you for having me. Keep up the great work. Thank you for raising awareness. We need more people like you out there.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Andrea. Thank you.
I mean it.
Okay, talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.